Thank you very much, Tatiana, and all the participants. We are waiting for some kind of wrap-up at the end of the third power conversation that will be next with the both moderators. Let me just put it this way. At this two-day conference, we aim at the future, how justice can become closer to citizens. How can justice really embrace their needs? The problems can take different shapes from country to country, but roughly we are, I'm sure, aware of what they are. But to make changes, to reform, to improve, we need to have some idea of the future, what we want to be, where we want to be in the future. And this reminds me a theory brought to light by Professor Marshall McLuhan in the 60s. And let me just trying to do this remotely. If you imagine that my life is this path, a straight path, where should be my past and where should be my future? I'm sure you all said that my past should be past behind me, on my back, and the future should be here. So, but this theory of Marshall McLuhan, it's not really a theory, it's more a proven sequence of events. It says something different. We move this way through the towards the future, that's right, but we do it moving backwards, as if we're looking or going to the future through a rear mirror. In other words, it's our path, blindfolded, that takes us to the future. For some reason, I thought this could make some kind of sense, apropos, because of this moment in this high-level conference. Just before the third power conversation of the evening, the organization of the conference named it Justice for All and Sustainable Development, once again with the moderation of Maaike de Langen, member of Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just and Inclusive Societies, that I invite again to take the stand.
Thank you very much. Good to have you all here for the third power conversation. And that was actually a very interesting introduction to, do we see the future ahead of us? I think it's true that we all have become a bit more modest in our ambitions to predict what will happen next due to the pandemic, because as much as it had been said by scientists that this was coming, nobody really saw it coming, let alone were we aware of what it would bring us and what impact it would have on our world. At the same time, there is, of course, a roadmap for that future that has been set out by all countries of the world in 2015, the Sustainable Development Goals. The SDGs, they were adopted as a set of goals to be achieved by 2030 as a roadmap for that future in a way. And they included the goal to provide equal access to justice for all in SDG 16. And it has been said many times that the rule of law and provision of access to justice for all really underpin the achievement of all the other goals. And that's what we'll be talking about in this third power conversation on justice for all and sustainable development. Accessible and effective justice systems are necessary to create equal opportunities for men and women, to ensure that all children have access to education, to make economies fair and inclusive, and to empower people to get access to public services such as healthcare. In this panel, we will discuss these links with other sectors and for the justice sector, and also the links with broader socio-economic goals. Due to the pandemic, human development is decreasing globally for the first time since we started to measure it. Social progress, economic growth, poverty reduction, health, education, all sectors of society have been affected. And the impacts of the pandemic have increased inequality and exacerbated vulnerability. It has put many groups at risk of facing increased legal problems as a result of unemployment, financial difficulties, housing problems, or increases in crime and violence. In addition, as we've heard in the conversation that just ended, the previous panel, small to medium-sized enterprises have been severely hit by the crisis, which is giving rise to a wide range of legal issues, from loan payments, labor disputes, to bankruptcies. Now, in this panel, as I said, we have 4 excellent speakers with us to discuss the broader impacts of how we do justice for the economy and the society, and what justice actors can contribute to economic recovery and rebuilding trust. It's my pleasure to introduce to you the 4 speakers that we have on this panel. We have Alejandro Alvarez, who is the Director of Rule of Law at the United Nations in the Office of the Secretary General. We have Romina Boarini, who is Director of the Center for Wellbeing, Inclusion, Sustainability and Equal Opportunity at the OECD. We have Joe Powell, who is Deputy Chief Executive Officer of the Open Government Partnership. And we have Emmanuel Crabit, the Director for Fundamental Rights and Rule of Law at DG Just. I will give each of them the floor and ask them to focus on two main questions that we've asked them to share their insights on. The first is on the impact of the justice gap and the fact that 1.5 billion people who are unable to resolve their justice problems on the socio-economic development in countries, especially in the context of the pandemic. And the second question is on how justice actors can collaborate with those working in other sectors. How can they contribute to economic recovery and societal reset after the pandemic? Well, let's start with Alejandro Alvarez. Please, Alejandro, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maaike. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon to all of you. And thank you to the Minister of Justice of Portugal and the OECD for the invite to speak. I will be sharing with you some ideas related to the deficit of trust that we are going through at this moment, towards institutions and the justice system in particular, are hopefully bring to you some ideas on how a way forward should look like. This is part of the reflection that we are having right now at the United Nations as part of a particular mandate that the General Assembly gave to the Secretary General that we call our Common Agenda, which is a forward-looking work that the Secretary General will provide to the General Assembly on what are the challenges that the world is facing right now and will face in the near future. The first thing that I would like to say is is that you may remember that in 2019, before the pandemic, changed totally our world, we were facing a number of demonstrations all across the globe, and people were very angry. And the reasons for those demonstrations were related to inequalities in general, but also corruption, the perceived idea that politicians and leaders were self-serving, but in any case, it was, and that anger as well, had a real impact in elections, where some particular candidates were brought to power with agendas that were very much anti-system. So that anger, that mistrust, also touched the justice system, was perceived as protecting the powerful and seeking under privileges. So that situation in 2019, we've seen evolving during the pandemic, and the expression of that mistrust is the misinformation, is the vaccine resistance and reluctancy. And we don't see any reason why these movements, will not resume after the pandemic eases, if that happens one day. Yes, it will. But we don't see why that wouldn't happen again, and the way that the world will focus the recovery will have a lot to do on how much people will express, their feelings towards the system. Remember that liberal democracies are built on the basis that my generation will be better off my previous generation, and my children will be better off than me. When that promise is broken, and so is broken the trust between people and institutions. So what I would say is that the future of the justice system has to be with, has to be also thought towards recreating a new social contract between people and institutions. This is going to be very much the message of the Secretary General in this report that he will issue by September on the need of recreating the social contract. And I have to say, related to the justice system, I am not sure that the justice system actors understand how much people mistrust them. And this is something that, deserves a serious conversation inside the justice system. People perceive justice actors as a elite that is out of touch of my real problems. So the question here is not only that the justice system needs to get back and connect to the real problems of people, meaning delivering for the real problems, so expanding services, but expanding services and bringing more solutions to people, does not conduct necessarily for an increase of trust. Research is showing that, service delivery does not create automatically more trust. So there is additional tasks that need to be taken by justice system, more explaining, more negotiation, more public service spirit, a different image from the justice system towards people. Those are things that we're going to have to take a look at as new reform efforts are being put forward. So thank you very much, Maaike.
Thank you, Alejandro. That is a very good insight also into some of the discussions that you are having at the United Nations about these topics. With that, let us turn to the next speaker, Romina Boarini. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maaike, for this introduction, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. I have a few slides. I wonder whether the organizers can kindly put them on the screen, whether I'm supposed to do so. Can we have the slides? Right. Right. Perfect. So hopefully you can see them. And so what I would like to do to start with is actually to share with you a few highlights that really looks at where we stand today in terms of the justice needs. And so before going to the questions that you, Maaike, were sharing about, the inputs of the justice needs on the current socioeconomic developments, and then the questions, the very important questions of cross-sectorial collaborations between the justice systems and the other policy sectors. Let me very, very quickly tell you where we are today. So essentially, every 2 years at the OECD, and in particular in the WISE Center that I have the pleasure to direct, we do a study that is called the Measuring Distance to SDGs Targets. And this is a study that, of course, was introduced by the OECD just after the adoption of the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda. We can go to the first slide, please. So we update the numbers and we release it every 2 years. And essentially the objective of this exercise is really to look at to what extent countries are actually making progress to travel actually to reach the SDGs. So in the current study that we are completing, we are in particular looking at the extent to which the COVID-19 has affected this effort. So specifically on SDG 16, which is of course the focus of our conversation today, and the indicators on access to justice that are covered by target 16.3, a careful review of country performance shows that actually access to justice still varies greatly between countries. And in addition to that, data gaps, which are still very big and prominent, actually do prevent a comprehensive assessment. Now, if you can see the slides, I'm not sure you can see the charts, so I have a few charts for you. And I don't see the slides. I think I still see can you hear me? Yes, thank you. Right, so in particular, let me just comment a couple of results. First of all, for the indicator 16.3.1, which is measuring the share of victims of violence who have reported their victimization, what we see is that on average, 1 in 2 OECD residents, so the half of the OECD population, declares to have been victim of violent crime in the previous 12 months that preceded the survey. Now, this reporting varies significantly, so there is a lot of variation, as I was saying before, a lot of country disparities in that respect, because we have countries such as Mexico that actually show that the numbers that report having been a victim of violent crime is only 12% to 80% in Denmark. And the data that we are including in this picture only cover 20 of OECD countries. And of course, we can discuss around, of course, the validity of these numbers that look at the issues of reporting crimes. For another indicator, 16.3.2, that in fact is capturing the unsentenced detainees as a proportion of the overall population, what we find is that 1 in 4 detainees are actually not sentenced in OECD countries. That means that they are held in prisons, penal institutions or correctional institutions, and those individuals are untried. They are either pre-trial or they're awaiting a first instance decision. And this rate is as high as 50% in Luxembourg and less than 10% in Lithuania, Poland, and the Czech Republic. Now, findings for other targets under Goal 16 show that while violence overall is declining in OECD countries, which of course is a good news, it remains unfortunately an issue in many places. And actually the distance to travel that is necessary to take to eliminate violence is actually smallest in the Netherlands, Switzerland, Slovenia, Iceland, and Norway. And it is the largest in Mexico, Colombia, Latvia, Lithuania, and the United States. We also have indications around the self-perceived political efficacy. So essentially that looks at to what extent people feel that they have a voice, in the justice system, and that varies greatly, again, between countries. For instance, you have Switzerland, Netherlands, and Nordic countries that display the highest perceptions of external political efficacy. So they have, a high sense that they actually can play a role and they can convey their voice in the functioning of a justice system. But on the opposite side of the spectrum, you have Southern and Eastern European countries that are much less satisfied from that point of view. Now, next slide, please. As I mentioned already, there are in fact still a number of outstanding data gaps for SDG 16, and of course this is quite problematic considering in fact that the adoption of SDGs now is something that happened a few years, and so of course since then number of actors, including the OECD, have made tremendous efforts, and the countries, of course, in the first place, really did a lot to try to fill those gaps. But nevertheless, SDG 16, and in particular, the targets that relate more specifically to the justice system, still are, not very well covered by available statistics, especially when you start breaking down those statistics by different groups in the population. And of course, you all know that one of the very core elements of SDGs is the notion that nobody should be left behind, and therefore, again, it would be obviously one of the important ambitions of the statistical agenda on this front, that in particular a focus is being put on fulfilling the statistical gaps on access to justice for the most vulnerable group in the population. In fact, just to give you an illustration, there are 24 indicators that have been proposed by the Interagency Expert Group for SDG 16, so the body that is responsible for monitoring SDGs 16. And today, only 16 out of those 24 indicators are actually available for the purpose of international comparison. So it means that essentially we're not able to monitor almost half of the 12 SDG 16 targets, and in particular, We have, for instance, no proper understanding of the situation when it comes to illicit financial flows, corruption, but also on things such as the transparency and inclusiveness of institutions. And as I said, we also have issues in terms of tracking the specific progress that is made on the accessibility of justice system and the quality of justice system from the perspective of the most vulnerable in the population. For target 16.3 on access to justice for all, we do have some positive development in sight because there's been a specific work. OECD has been, in fact, a co-custodian. It means it's one of the agencies that is working together with UNDP and UNOEDC, and actually did advance, technical work to actually ensure that very, very soon we will be able to develop actually report on new evidence and new data for some of the targets in SDGs 16, where we don't have enough statistical evidence at the moment. Quickly, because I think I don't have a lot of time, and I'm sure that we will come back.
You're out of time, so very quickly, please.
All right. So, well, let me just say that, of course, what we have seen during the COVID-19 in terms of this disruption in the justice system, this has obviously not this has compounded the other economic and social effects from the economic crisis. And so, in fact, what we see that it's during those years and those recent months that the limited access to justice system, in fact, has reinforced the poor situation of some households in the population. So this is just to say that, and I'm sure we'll come back, that in fact the trends moved in the wrong direction there. And the second and final point on the cross-sectorial collaboration, this is fundamental. So again, I hope I'll have a little bit more time to develop that, but clearly it's very, very important to move away from a sort of a siloed approach to this. Of course, justice system is important itself, but it is also very important to understand how it needs to interact with other policy institutions and other policy sectors to ensure, in fact, that a real cross-sectorial strategy is put in place by countries from the perspective of increasing, the accessibility, but also the outcomes of the justice system for everybody in the population. Let me leave it here, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that and for all the work that OECD does on people-centered justice. For those in the audience who are not aware of this, please have a look at the guidelines that have been developed for legal needs surveys and other work that has been done by OECD, who's really a leader in making this people-centered justice data more available and also comparing it and developing the methodologies. Thank you very much for those remarks. And with that, I would like to turn to Joe Powell of the Open Government Partnership. Joe, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maaike. Good to be here. And I thought maybe I can just pick up from where Romina left off, because really for us at the Open Government Partnership, it's precisely because we see that without a justice approach, enhancing transparency and accountability and participation in a way that delivers results for citizens will be limited. And conversely, when there is investment in building a fair and effective justice system, it does support social and economic development. And I thought there were kind of two areas I would explore given their relevance to the pandemic, improving public services and tackling corruption. So if you take support for public services, we've seen that there are several key justice, openness intersections that actually support improved services for citizens. So for example, access to information around how and where citizens can access services has been really under pressure during the pandemic. Similarly, transparency on performance of different public services in a way that respects privacy, but it's also disaggregated to see which groups are being reached or excluded, and accountability where citizens are able to have redress for services not delivered or for substandard services in their community. So for each of those, access to justice is central because it restores a citizen's legal and enables a citizen's legal right to public services, especially for populations that have been historically marginalized or those that have been excluded in this pandemic. So to give you two concrete examples, where member countries of OGP are moving on this approach. In Kenya, the government has a partnership between an ICT center and the Employment and Labor Relations Court and the National Legal Aid Service, which is specifically designed to ensure that data from civil society legal aid providers informs decisions in the formal justice sector related to labor disputes during the pandemic. And we know that there have been an increase in sudden loss of employment and unfair termination or redundancy situations where this is providing a much more citizen and people-centered approach to resolving those disputes. Another is in North Macedonia, where the Ministry for Social Policy is working with civil society to improve access to legal services and information on the legal rights of the Roma community, which has obviously faced both direct and indirect discrimination in employment, health, education, and housing for many years. So these are just two specific sort of illustrations of what previous speakers have mentioned, I think, in terms of how access to justice underpins people's basic rights and access to services. But to answer your second question, and also where Romina left off around collaboration across sectors, I think one that obviously we as open government advocates have been paying a lot of attention to is transparency and accountability around spending related to the pandemic. So we know governments have stepped up and the multilateral system has stepped up with trillions of dollars of spending on stimulus, on social protection, on recovery packages. But of course, in every country, we have seen where that money has been misspent, whether through systemic inefficiencies or even corruption, as we saw with some of the medical procurement around COVID. And we really see a big opportunity here for justice systems and actors to work proactively with other parts of government to actually propose and improve enforcement of laws related, for example, to conflict of interest and lobbying, to open contracting and public procurement, to beneficial ownership transparency and illicit financial flows. And I think there's a huge potential here for greater collaboration with justice sector actors, although of course, justice sector actors themselves also need to embrace that openness to help rebuild trust, as Alejandro mentioned. And my final point really is, I guess, just to zoom right out to the bigger picture. We are unfortunately still in 15 consecutive years of democratic backsliding, erosion of political and civil liberties, declining civic space, pressure on civil society. We know those trends have got worse during the pandemic. So I'd really just put out an urgent call for champions in the justice sector to help push back against this erosion of core freedoms of press, association, assembly, privacy, and more. We really need a much stronger coalition across all different sectors to help push back on that trend.
Thank you very much, Joe. Those are some very interesting comments, and especially linking justice sector to that public service delivery and the legal. The employment and labor sector discrimination, but also more broadly bringing it to transparency and accountability that people can have in government and the key role of justice actors for that. So thank you for that. And with that, I would like to give the floor to Emmanuel Crabit of DG Justice. Please go ahead.
Many thanks, and many thanks to the Portuguese presidency for this important conference. I would be short. I would first want to say that improving and ensuring the independence, quality, and efficiency of the justice systems in our EU member states is very high on the agenda of the EU institution. This is clearly a key priority for the rule of law, of course, because justice systems are a key component of the rule of law, for the democracy, because we cannot have a smooth functioning of our democracy without a justice system, effective justice system, and of course for fundamental rights and equality, non-discrimination, and more generally for social justice. And also, and the previous panel was very interesting, also for the economic growth and the economic recovery. So, I mean, I will not preach a converted person here, but the effective justice system, the effectiveness of justice system is very crucial. What I want to pass what I would like to pass as a message is the need to use the full, all the instruments which could be used for precisely achieving this objective of improving the independence, quality, and efficiency of the justice system. And within the EU, we have developed what we call rule of law toolbox. And this rule of law toolbox, in fact, contains many different types of instruments. And maybe I would like to focus only on two types of instruments. The first one is the instruments which aims at facilitating the sharing of experience and at anticipating possible problems. So we need to be better equipped within the EU to understand what is happening, both to help member states to know the good experiences and the best practices in certain member states, which could be a source of inspiration, and secondly, to be able to anticipate possible problems, because we know that as any reform, you have good and bad reforms. And this tool for better sharing information on justice system, including as regard the need to facilitate access to justice, are maybe two tools. The EU Justice Scoreboard, which is a very well-known instrument, which dedicates a lot of aspects or indicators on the accessibility of the justice system and also on the use of the digitalization. We try to use what you said, a user-centric approach. So the objective is not to look at only the equipment, but rather to see at the end of the day how the digitalization could help to deliver justice. And that's a very important point, in particular, how the people are informed about their case. And we see that, in fact, if you look at all the level of courts in member states, there is maybe not one single member state who is able to offer at all levels in all law matters a full access. So something very basic is still challenging. The second tool in terms of sharing information monitoring is the rule of law report. Since September, we have delivered the first rule of law report, and this rule of law report as one of the key sections of this report is about the justice system. The interest vis-à-vis the EU Justice Scoreboard is to complement the EU Justice Scoreboard by providing a more country-specific analysis of the problem. The EU Justice Scoreboard is a comparative tool based on common indicator, but it's very important to have this comparative overview. But in addition, we need to have a country-specific analysis. And this is exactly what we try to do with the Rule of Law report. And the Rule of Law report contains a lot of things on the issue of access to justice, including to monitor the reform on legal aid, because this is something that we have noticed in many member states of the EU, that there is a trend for changing legal aid. And we try to look at in which direction it is going. But more generally, what is very interesting is the resources dedicated to the justice system. And this is something that we are looking at. And the two instruments are very complementary, EU Justice Scoreboard and the Rule of Law report. Another type of instrument beyond this monitoring tool is the fundings. That's clear. that how the EU can contribute to fund the improvement, the modernization of justice system is very high. There are many different instruments. We are using structural fund. We have also the reform program. But one of the very important instruments which is discussed now is the recovery and resilience facility, which will make available to member states more than 600 billion euro in loans and grants, of which each member state would need to dedicate a minimum of 20% of the digital transition. So this is also very important because the facility will offer the opportunity to address country-specific challenges related to the quality and efficiency of the national justice system. So it's very important because it is now that the member states are preparing their national recovery and resilience plan, and it's very important to make sure that all member states are fully aware of this opportunity. But of course, at the end of the day, having an effective justice system, which means independent, quality, and efficient justice system, it's not only an issue of funding. I think that my conclusion is that we know that it's not. We know that there is no one-fits-all solution. We need to better understand the country-specific challenges. We need to be cautious with just having a horizontal solution for very, very specific country specific problem. And it's very important to look at what are the challenges which exist in all our EU member states. My second conclusion is that it's very important to invest. We know that we need to invest in our justice system. So that's why we are encouraging member states to look at more in detail how best invest in their justice. It is an investment for not only for the public administration, but it's first of all an investment for the people. And this is really important to recall. Spending fund on the justice system is very important for the democracy, for the rule of law, and for equality. And my last conclusion is that we need to join efforts. We need to involve the stakeholders. We need to involve the civil society. We need to involve the judges, the lawyers, and of course, all national authority. But it's a joint effort. This is what we are learning in doing. And again, this conference is a very good opportunity for us to underline the need to have a joint thinking, joint effort. So many thanks.
Thank you very much. I think that those are some very good conclusions. I will just, we are very much out of time, but I want to give the other three panelists just one last chance in about 30 seconds to share their final conclusions, and then we'll close the panel. Let me start by Romina, very briefly, please.
Thanks, Maaike. Maybe I just take the opportunity indeed to follow up on these issues of cross-sectorial collaboration. I was really interested by what Joe and the speaker from the commissioner said, that relates to that. I think that this cross-sectorial collaboration is so fundamental here. And so concretely, how to do that? I think, certainly from the OECD perspective, we would very much stress the need typically to share resources when it comes to data and statistics. And, if you look at all the different dimensions, the justice system is working on, some of them obviously are also the ones that matter, for instance, from, the welfare type of departments or the labor departments, etc. And so when you look at the way they are, producing data on those different issues, they don't necessarily communicate with each other. So that's an obvious, I would say, channel where you can, reinforce cooperation and making sure that information, or who is, for instance, accessing, services, as Joy was saying, if that information is also one that obviously is used by the justice system and is used also by others in the departments. So certainly, the data sharing is a very, very concrete one. Secondly, at the levels of measures and programs, there again, it's important that we start articulating those different measures. Joy was talking about indeed the issues on anti-discrimination policies, for instance, with the ones on social services, with the one that are more related, for instance, to housing. And when I'm talking about housing, I'm not just talking about sort of access to housing, but for instance also something that we are seeing, of course, in the current context, it's related to the evictions and all the fact that a number of very vulnerable populations are going to be deprived from housing sort of rights. And so again, that's another very good example of the fact that this type of policy measure is not just something that needs to be decided by one actor in the government, but really requires a lot of sharing in terms of the strategic sort of thinking that goes behind. And finally, of course, yes, right. So I'll conclude it with the point of social contract that was made by Alejandro at the very beginning. And so that's certainly also, a strong expectations and a lot of demands by the population, and certainly the most vulnerable, but not only. I will also say, the middle class, that you really need to sort of reconcile the trends that we have observed in terms of the economy and society with the rights of everybody. And so there, I think it is important that we are thinking beyond just the standard boundaries of policies. We're really thinking about those policies from the perspective of how they can be made acceptable from the social justice viewpoint. Very final point on the sorry to say that
we're really out of time, so 5 seconds.
Okay, yes, just to say that I think indeed the strategy, the recovery strategies and the fund, the facility that the Commission has just created and Europe has just created, these are wonderful opportunities indeed, to start building back better in a way that exactly address those very important gaps of the justice systems that we see in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Alejandro, any last thoughts for you, very briefly?
Not much, Maaike. Thank you very much. It was an interesting conversation. My plea, for our community to try to take a step back, to look at the overall picture, how people are receiving our message, how people are looking at the issues, and certainly the efforts that we are all making in having better data and better information is critical. Now let's also make the plea to make sure that we are listening to and understanding how people see our issues.
Thank you. Very, very important point, Alejandro. Joe, the last word is for you.
I think just briefly, I mean, it's this conference and many other kind of big international summits coming up have, they offer an opportunity to show the relevance of access to justice, open justice to all of these big topics that are on the political agenda. And I think the skill will be, how do we use this political momentum to get behind the types of policies that Emmanuel mentioned, those context-specific national reforms, and provide the political support, financial support, the collaboration around the implementation of those policies. That to me is like the big opportunity we have. Obviously at OGP, we are big believers in co-creation between government, civil society, and other actors. And we would just have an open door for collaboration with anyone watching who's interested in getting involved around how we get that stronger co-creation and implementation of some of these policies we've been discussing. But I think there's a big political opportunity ahead.
Thank you very much. We have some concluding remarks from Tatiana Tetlova and myself right after this, but let me just take this opportunity to thank you all, our panelists, from Romina Boarini from the OECD, Emmanuel Crabit from the European Union, Joe Powell from the Open Government Partnership, and Alejandro Alvarez from the United Nations. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your thoughts with us today. And with that, I hand it back to the organizers.